Breaking news this morning as a massive manhunt across Europe comes to an end. Anis Amri, the terror suspect in the Berlin Christmas market attack, killed in a shootout with police in Milan, Italy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Greg Jarrett, live in America's Newsroom.
And I'm Molly Line. Bill and Martha are off. Authorities say Amri opened fire at a checkpoint after the police asked for his ID. One officer was wounded in the shootout that followed. And Italy's interior minister says the man this morning is, quote, without a shadow of a doubt, the suspect in the Berlin attack that killed 12 and wounded dozens more. And any moment now, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is expected to make a statement. But first, Amy Kellogg is live in Milan, Italy. Amy, how did this all wind up in Milan?
Well, that's what Italians are asking, specifically investigators, Molly, who want to know, was this his final destination and did he have a network here? But Amri actually started out yesterday in Chambéry, France, and then he took a train to Turin, Italy, finally to Milan Central Station, at which point he shifted to a northeastern suburb of Milan where he was picked up at 3 o'clock in the morning and ultimately shot. But because there are free borders between European countries, Molly, Amri was able to slip freely between at least 3 countries in the last couple of days until 2 police officers stopped him on a square in this Milan suburb at 3 a.m. He simply looked suspicious. When they asked him where he was from, he told them Calabria. When they realized his accent wasn't Southern Italian at all and asked for documents, he opened his knapsack, pulled out a gun, and opened fire on one of the officers, whose injuries are not life-threatening. Thank goodness. His colleague, a young trainee, quickly shot Amri dead. Officers did not stop Anis Amri because they recognized him as the Berlin terrorist. It was a routine patrol, and the officers sensed something was off, but there were no identification documents in his bag, no cell phone, just his train tickets from France and several hundred euros.
Our attention continues to be at its highest level. Threats must not be underestimated. But I believe what happened tonight allows our fellow citizens to know that the government is present, that Italy is present.
He was identified ultimately by his fingerprints, Molly, and there was communication, of course, in the middle of the night between Milan and Berlin for that, Molly.
Yeah, and certainly this massive manhunt underway. How did he manage to move so freely across Europe?
Well, his odyssey of terror and crime began here in Italy, and obviously ended here in Italy. He began this epic journey in Tunisia. He wasn't fleeing political oppression there, Molly. He was fleeing an arrest for theft. He slipped onto a boat shortly after the Arab Spring began, mingled in with Syrian refugees. He ended up in Italy, and he set a refugee center on fire. At that point, he was thrown into jail for several years, and when he was freed, the Italians tried to deport him, but they couldn't get the necessary documents from Tunisia to send him back. That gave him time to slip into Germany over those free borders. He was monitored by the Germans from May until September of this year, suspected of trying to organize a robbery to buy some arms for an attack in Germany. Due to insufficient evidence, that surveillance stopped. Germany also tried to expel him, but couldn't get, again, the Tunisian passport in time to send him back before he wreaked carnage Monday night, taking the lives of 12 innocent people at a Christmas market in the center of Berlin. His family in Tunisia has been widely interviewed, Molly, in these last few days. They say that he was a troublemaker, he was into drugs, he was into drinking, he was never particularly religious, and apparently he radicalized in prison. And also, we're hearing some reports right now here in Italy that he may have pledged allegiance to ISIS in a video before he died.
Wow, it's an incredible backstory. Thank you, Amy Kellogg in Milan, for us today.
In another breaking news story, we're following this one overseas, a hijacking situation on the island nation of Malta. Officials say 2 suspects armed with grenades diverted a domestic Libyan flight to Malta. More than 100 passengers were said to be on board at one point, but now it appears most, if not all of them, have been released. However, authorities say some crew is still on board that plane. No word on what the hijackers' demands are. We'll be keeping a close eye on this developing story.
President-elect Donald Trump apparently calling for an expansion of the American nuclear arsenal on Twitter. Trump tweeting, quote, "The United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes." Peter Ducey has more from the Trump estate in Palm Beach, Florida. What is Trump saying about this morning, Peter?
Molly, Trump's team is out clarifying now. They say that what he meant with that tweet about expanding the nuclear arsenal is that there are a lot of terrorists and rogue nations out there trying to get their hands on nuclear weapons. So he wants to make sure the United States, under his presidency, has a modernized enough or a modern enough arsenal to pursue peace through strength. And just about an hour and a half ago, we got some more details about exactly who the president-elect was trying to reach with that tweet about us having more nukes.
It was in response to a lot of countries. Russia, China, and others are talking about expanding their nuclear capability. And his point, which I think a lot of people are leaving off at the end of that tweet, is unless they come to their senses. And I think countries need to know that under a Donald Trump presidency, business as usual is over. He's going to act. He's going to protect America. And if they increase their nuclear capability, America will act.
MSNBC is reporting this morning that Mr. Trump told someone there off the air that he's fine letting an arms race start, which obviously conflicts with what his spokespeople are saying last night and today. And the reason talk like that and the tweet about expanding the arsenal is raising eyebrows among some analysts is because recent U.S. policy, especially under President Obama, has focused almost exclusively on arms control and trying to reduce the size of the U.S. arsenal. Molly?
Yeah, interesting. We just heard there from Sean Spicer. What do we know about the people who just got jobs in the Trump White House?
In the comms shop, the folks who just got jobs were with him at Trump Tower. They were with him on Trump Force One, and they're going to be with him at the White House. The face of the new communications team that was just announced is going to be Sean Spicer, who you just heard there from. He is the longtime RNC spokesman. Hope Hicks is going to have a key role in the comms department as well. She is one of the longest tenured Trump political staffers, joining his team before he entered the presidential race. Jason Miller, who started this past cycle with Ted Cruz, but became communications director for Mr. Trump, is going to head to his White House in a similar role. And the staffer in charge of social media for the mogul turned president-elect, Dan Scavino, is staying on board as well. The president-elect obviously changed the way campaigns communicate with the public, and the people who helped him do that are staying with him. Molly?
All right, Peter, thank you very much. Keeping an eye on the transition as it goes. Thank you.
With more on this, Guy Benson, political editor for townhall.com and a Fox News contributor. Guy, good to see you. All right, so Trump tweets out, "We must greatly strengthen and expand our nuclear capability." That's a pretty controversial tweet, isn't it, for no other reason than it's rather vague and ambiguous. Is he talking about offensive systems or defensive systems? How do you interpret that?
That's the point. It's very vague, and there's different interpretations that people can perhaps come around to. And so you might say there's sort of two sides to this, Greg. On one hand, one of the big appeals, I think, of Donald Trump as a candidate was, and he said this over and over again during debates, we need to keep our enemies and our adversaries on their toes. We have to be unpredictable, keep them guessing. We don't want them to know exactly what we're going to do. And so you might say, okay, this is a good thing. You've got some of these foreign powers, they're going to be hostile, wondering what a President Trump might be talking about with nuclear weapons. That will at least get their attention and say, you know, let's maybe think twice before we mess around too much. On the other hand, you need to give absolute clarity and certainty to your allies, so you don't have people in London and Berlin and Sydney all across the world scratching their heads wondering, what did the U.S. president-elect just mean by a tweet about nuclear weapons?
And that's the problem with appearing to announce policy in 140 characters.
Right.
And of course, you know, Trump's communications team was left scrambling to try to explain what he meant by that. In the end, they said, no, he means halting nuclear proliferation through strength. Well, that seems like the opposite of Trump's tweet, doesn't it?
That it does. And so now you've got, again, some of those allies wondering, okay, is the spin from the press team the truth, or was this something, sort of an insight into Donald Trump's thinking about nuclear weapons that he just dashed off in a tweet? I think that there's an argument to be made that it's a very good platform for him, Twitter that is,
right,
to communicate with the American people and the world on a whole host of topics. Having such a limited character limit, when you're talking about something as serious as nuclear weapons and potential nuclear warfare, I don't know if that's an appropriate venue for that, Greg. I mean, and you don't want to nitpick too much, but maybe we can agree on that.
Well, apparently there's no agreement between Trump and his team,
right?
Because this morning, reportedly, he communicates with the hosts of another network and says something to this effect: let it be an arms race. We will outmatch them at every pass and outlast them. Now, I mean, you know, a lot of Americans are going to say, wait a minute, we don't want another arms race that will escalate beyond our budget and bankrupt us in the same way it happened to the former Soviet Union.
Yeah. The President of the United States, or the incoming president, should not be in favor of or yearning for a nuclear arms race, saying, oh, well, fine, bring it on, we're going to win. We could probably win, given our capabilities and our wealth and our technology, but to have, and who is they? Who would be involved in this race? The goal is, particularly in parts of the world where things are not stable like they are here, the more nukes that are being created, whether it's in Iran, whether they're in Pakistan, of course, they have nuclear weapons as well. You don't want more nukes floating around if unstable governments destabilize further, and God knows who gets their hands on them. So that's the type of thing that a president shouldn't be saying.
Trump talked openly on the campaign trail about allowing Japan and South Korea to develop nukes. So, you know, the line seems to be moving quite frequently. Guy Benson, will leave it at that. Good to see you. Thanks.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Much more ahead on our top story. The suspected terrorist in the Berlin Christmas market massacre shot and killed in Italy. What we're learning about his final days on the run.
And Russian President Vladimir Putin stepping up to the microphones for his year-end news conference. What he's saying after the turbulent 2016.
And gridlock at the airport. The Christmas travel rush slows down to a crawl as the delays and the problems pile up.
It's pretty nuts. It's like 30, 40 minutes just to get in and out.
We arrived at 4:07 and got off the plane at 6:37. We're on the tarmac for 2.5 hours.
Police in Australia say they foiled a major terror plot. About 400 officers in Melbourne conducting a massive raid overnight, detaining 5 suspects they say were inspired by ISIS and planning an attack in multiple locations in that city, possibly on Christmas Day. The country's justice minister says the attack was imminent and, quote, would have been the most serious in terms of its intent ever.
New details now on our top story. The Tunisian refugee suspected of carrying out the truck attack that killed 12 people in Berlin is now dead after a shootout with police in Milan, Italy. Authorities saying he used 6 different names and 3 nationalities in his travels across Europe. Carl Higbee joins us, chairman of the George Washington Leadership Foundation, former U.S. Navy SEAL, author of the book Enemies, Foreign and Domestic, A SEAL's Story. Carl, great to see you. So this is not an intelligence breakthrough that led to this guy. It was rather an accident. Italian authorities sort of stumbled onto the guy.
Recognized he didn't have a similar accent.
What do you make of how it ended?
Well, I'm glad he's dead. I'm glad they got him. Now it's less for us to deal with down the pipeline. But the fact is, this is becoming almost like a social norm. People see it almost every day on the news. There's been a terror attack somewhere. And my worry is that people in America are being desensitized because it's not happening to us yet.
Wouldn't it have been better to take him alive if they could have? And I'm not criticizing them. He pulled a gun. They did what they had to do to defend themselves. But he's part of a larger network in Germany. How embedded and lethal is this network of terrorists there and elsewhere in Europe? And, you know, might we have learned a lot?
Well, maybe, but most probably the point is these are soldiers of the Islamic State. These are not, there's not a lone wolf thing like you said. But the issue is they are only the very bottom man on the totem pole to this larger network. They are often only told, from what we understand, that they are told specifically about their attack, what they're to do, and deliberately not told about other attacks down the line that may be doing in case they are captured by doing the attacks.
Does this Berlin attack at the Christmas marketplace expose some serious gaps in European security? There appears to be a lack of data gathering, coordination, and of course these open borders with uncontrolled immigration.
Correct. And this is a huge lesson for the United States of America here, because without controlled borders, as EU, you can go. They said this guy in the last 3 days has been to as many as 3 or 4 countries trying to get away from this thing. This is what happens when you don't have controlled borders like we have on the southern border of the United States. People can come in and out freely, and we may not even know about it. So this should be a huge lesson in security.
All right, the chairman of the German police union said this, quote, "The question 82 million Germans probably want an answer to: how many more ticking time bombs are roaming around here?" Fair question.
Very fair question. And what we have to ask is, whose side are these leaders on? Whose side is Merkel on? Whose side is Obama on? Obama recently just took away the provision, I think it was this morning or yesterday, took away the provision that you could now ask people to, Muslim immigrants or immigrants from radicalized areas to register. He took that off the table. We haven't used it since 2011, but he took it off the table. And you have to ask, whose side are these leaders on? Whose side is President Obama on when he's doing this? Almost like they're trying to set Trump up for failure.
It takes months for security and police forces in Germany to make arrests. Often they have to let suspects go for lack of evidence. Their system of justice and proof and detention is different than ours. Are German police and security forces outnumbered and undermanned?
I couldn't speak to whether or not they're undermanned. I haven't been on the ground with their police force, but I know our police forces, for quite frankly, they're just not prepared to deal with this because of the rules that they have to adhere to. And also recently with the hatred towards police officers we've seen, they're scrutinized under every single thing. They're worried about losing their job every single day just for giving out a parking ticket. This is something we need to support our law enforcement much more heavily. When I see a law enforcement officer, I thank him. If I can, I buy him a cup of coffee. And we need people in America to be supportive of that so they know that we got their backs.
Yeah, and every time this happens overseas, there is deep concern here at home. Oftentimes, local communities and their law enforcement escalate their alerts. We're going to see more of this, not just in Europe, but here at home?
We are. We're going to see a lot more. And, over the holidays, I've already seen it. You have people in the militarization of police officers because they have to. And the problem is it's unsustainable. Financially, it's unsustainable by manpower because we don't have enough officers to work these double, triple shifts, especially through the holidays, because they're giving up time with their families, too.
All right. You're a country fan.
I'm a huge country fan. And we're going to see Big and Rich down in D.C. with the Great America PAX party. So I think it's the 19th, before inauguration.
All right. We'll look out for you.
Oh, yeah.
Carl Higbee, great to see you as always.
Thank you very much. Merry Christmas.
Molly?
Oh, terrifying moment at a popular ski resort caught on video.
Can you tell them?
They're coming. They know. They're coming.
You know your arms are hurting, but just take some deep breaths.
I can't. They hurt so bad. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Oh, you could tell how scared he is, that young boy left dangling from a ski lift. How rescue teams brought him down.
And President-elect Donald Trump taking direct aim at the defense industry over the Pentagon's most expensive next-generation weapons program. But will Mr. Trump's tough tactics help or hurt in the long run?
What you will see, I think, from Donald Trump and his administration is looking at every budget, at every number, at every program and saying, is this the best we can do? Can we take this money and can we return it to the middle class? Can we provide tax cuts? That's what the American people sent him there to do.
We're just now getting some new pictures from Aleppo and sheer devastation there. Syrian state television releasing this video of the previously rebel-held territory, which is now, of course, in government hands. The once thriving city reduced to a wasteland of rubble and damaged buildings. The rebels controlled eastern Aleppo for about 4 years as their Syrian stronghold bomb disposal teams reportedly dismantling explosives and booby traps that were left behind.
President-elect Donald Trump taking on the defense industry yet again, tweeting, based on the tremendous cost and cost overruns of the Lockheed Martin F-35, I have asked Boeing to price out a comparable F-18 Super Hornet. Former campaign manager Corey Lewandowski weighing in on Hannity last night, calling this move pitch perfect.
And now what we see is a CEO coming in and saying, you know what, Mr. President-elect, you're absolutely right. We're going to cut the costs. We're going to save taxpayer money, and we're still going to be able to deliver this on time. That's what we want from our president. That's what we expected when the American people elected Donald Trump. That's what he's going to deliver on.
Trish Regan, anchor of Intelligence Report on the Fox Business Network, joins me now to talk about this. Trish, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Molly.
So let's kick off with this. Appears that Donald Trump is pitting two companies against each other, right?
That's good business, right? I mean, this is exactly what he should be doing, and I get a chuckle out of it because this is what you would do in the business community, and this is the background he comes from. No self-respecting CEO is ever going to pay one dime more for anything than he has to. He wants to get a good deal. He wants to get the best price. Well, this doesn't normally happen in politics because nobody cares because it's somebody else's money, right? So there's
our
not
money.
this, exactly, it's our money. So you're spending taxpayer money. It's not quite as real. So he's coming in and saying, no. As a matter of principle, I'm not going to pay any more than I have to, and I'm going to negotiate on behalf of the American people. This is why they put me here, and it's pretty refreshing.
Well, it's interesting because he calls out Boeing initially for the Air Force One costs. The head of Boeing comes down, chats with them, comes out and says, we're going to make this more affordable. Now he's calling out Lockheed, and he's already talked to Boeing. You know, where does this go next? Are we going to see the next head of a company heading down to Mar-a-Lago to meet?
I think anybody that's doing a lot of business with the government is probably going to want to have that meeting, and I think they probably have to be prepared to make some concessions and to be more aggressive and to try and offer the government the best possible deal. And we need that. We need that kind of discipline, fiscal discipline imposed on some of these big projects. I mean, $400 billion is what the F-35 program costs. $400 billion. That's half Obama's stimulus plan. Remember his $800 billion stimulus plan? That is a lot of money. And so if you can start to get these numbers into a more manageable space, I think it's going to go a long way towards making us as a nation more productive. Our government needs to be productive for us. In terms of what they're spending, they haven't been.
Yeah, and President-elect has inserted himself into business dealings now. We've seen with Carrier out in Indiana, and now we're seeing it here with these defense contractors. It's been fascinating to watch. Is it sustainable? Can he keep doing this once he assumes the presidency next year?
You know, that's a really good question, and I think it's going to be challenging in that you can't stick your nose into every single deal that's happening. But some of the bigger ones out there, I mean, certainly when it comes to a $400 billion F-35 program, it's worthwhile for him to get in. The $4 billion Air Force One carrier, that's worthwhile for him to perhaps get involved in. You know, companies like Carrier, that was a big thing on the campaign platform. I don't know if he can go around to every company that is potentially shipping jobs overseas and get involved, but he's setting a tone, Molly. And think about it. If you're a company and you know the president's out there and he can get up on this bully pulpit and go after you in a big way, affecting your business, you may think twice before you decide to ship all those jobs overseas. In fact, we've even seen Apple. Tim Cook had a meeting with him recently, and Apple's been talking about bringing production of the iPhone back into the U.S. from China. So companies are taking note.
Right, so he's not just talking to Boeing and Lockheed Martin.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, the meeting with Tim Cook, you know, it was funny. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, actually came out to his employees and tried to explain why he had that meeting with the president-elect. It was a little strange because why should a big CEO have to explain to his employees why he's meeting with the president-elect? Because so many employees don't like him. But Tim Cook's smart. You know, he knows where his bread is buttered, effectively, and he needs to get along with the president of the United States if he's going to continue having a productive company. And all these CEOs are recognizing that, and it's the expression "new sheriff in town." It's very true,
and it's been fascinating to see it unfold. Thank you so much, Trish Regan. We appreciate it.
Russian President Vladimir Putin holding his annual year-end news conference this morning. What he's saying today to Democrats here at home who blame him for Hillary Clinton's loss.
And President-elect Trump sticking with his pledge to drain the swamp in spite of what one top Republican says.
This is a phrase I told you. I didn't like it. I thought it was hokey. But it's not hokey. It's called drain the swamp. We're going to go to Washington. We're going to drain the swamp.
Our top story this morning, the Tunisian suspect in the Berlin Christmas market attack killed in a police shootout in Italy. Police in Milan say two officers stopped Anas Amri during a routine check this morning. Suddenly, Amri pulls a gun from his backpack, shooting one of the officers before Amri was killed. That officer now reportedly in the hospital, expected to recover. No word on how Amri traveled from Berlin to Milan. 12 people were killed in Monday's Christmas attack in the marketplace there, and more than 50 others were injured. We're going to have much more on this developing story.
President-elect Trump insisting that he is still committed to draining the swamp, tweeting, "Someone incorrectly stated that the phrase drain the swamp was no longer being used by me. Actually, we will always be trying to drain the swamp, DTS." Apparently, that someone is Newt Gingrich, who said earlier this week that draining the swamp wouldn't be a high priority. The former speaker apologized.
I want to report that I made a big boo-boo. I talked this morning with President-elect Donald Trump, and he reminded me he likes draining the swamp. I mischaracterized it the other day. He intends to drain the swamp. So I want all of you to know I goofed. Draining the swamp is in. The alligators should be worried, and you'll hear me write more about alligators and the swamp.
Juan Williams is a Fox News political analyst and author of We the People. And Mercedes Schlapp is a former media spokeswoman for President George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor. Thank you both for being here today.
Good morning.
Good morning. Mercedes, I heard you chuckling there just for a moment. There's a little mea culpa, little insider snafu going on. What do you make of Newt Gingrich and him kind of walking this back?
Well, I have to say, for Speaker Newt Gingrich to say boo-boo, that's kind of sweet, very sweet from the Speaker. I think that the drain the swamp has become an incredibly popular slogan for Donald Trump. Obviously, what he is doing is bringing in the heavyweights, the outsiders, not your typical politicians to take on these key cabinet positions here in Washington. He really wants to change it up here in Washington, not have it business as usual. The other component of this is obviously what he talked about back in October about the ethics reforms, lobbying reforms. This is something that we haven't seen happen in Congress since the passing of the Honest Leadership and Open Government law that was passed in 2007 after the Jack Abramoff scandal, where Congress did move forward to limit lobbying efforts. But again, lobbying has been around since the beginning of the Republic. This is going to be a challenge, but if anyone can take on the challenge, it's going to be Donald Trump.
Yeah, and not the biggest, big mistake as far as insider politics is concerned. But what do you think, Juan, that Newt Gingrich coming out saying this, then walking it back? Is there a mix-up in communication here?
No, I think that Donald Trump, in fact, said at first that he didn't even like the phrase, as you heard, but then took to it, and then I think it became something that the audience at his rallies really responded to and began chanting, and so it was kind of something he embraced at that point. But it's not only Newt Gingrich who said, we're not going to do that, but Corey Lewandowski, who at one point was his campaign manager, said it's a low priority. So they're all trying to walk it back because the fact is that Donald Trump is appointing people from Goldman Sachs and other billionaires and millionaires and generals, people who are, kind of central figures in the swamp of Washington, the too big to fail crowd. And so people are now going to be like, wait, is he going to disappoint us on this one? So what about the wall? What about immigration? What about Obamacare? I think I think the reason that so many people, including specifically Donald Trump, are telling Newt, hey, walk this back is they don't want to set him up for being a guy that is about to disappoint a lot of his supporters.
He's not going to disappoint his supporters. I don't know what you're talking about, Juan. I mean, clearly what Donald Trump is trying to do here is ensure, in his mind, his focus is about job creation. His focus is on the American worker in those communities like Michigan, like Ohio, like Pennsylvania, who have suffered, who haven't been able to rebuild their lives because of the fact that you've had industries leave their communities. And so I think it is center in his mind to ensure that the American worker is front and center.
And
I think part of that is ensuring that you put in talented people in place in key positions, successful businessmen, successful generals, to come in and really think in a different way how to run this horrible Washington bureaucracy.
I appreciate your point, but I'm just saying to you, that's not drain the swamp of the people who have run Washington for decades. And I think that was the power of the suggestion. Drain the swamp. Get the people who have been enriching themselves, the people who have been protecting themselves and not looking out for the little guy out of Washington. And so what you get even when you talk about jobs are questions about, well, how do you bring back, let's say, coal mining jobs? I think most people know that's a promise that's going to be very hard to fulfill. When you talk about manufacturing jobs, again, you can talk to the CEOs at the big companies, but they're going to tell you wages are much lower in Mexico and elsewhere. And even if you reduce taxes and regulation, it's not going to compensate for that. Automation, another huge factor. So I think the issue here, when you see Newt Gingrich walking this back, is really Donald Trump, the president-elect, walking it back and saying, I'm going to try to deliver on my promises. And don't see this as the first one that I failed you on.
Well, I tell you, Donald, this interesting point about Drain the Swamp is, does it have a broader meaning? Initially, when it was rolled out, it had a lot to do with lobbyists, Insider Washington.
Right.
And now all of a sudden we're talking about the economy. Does it have a broader meaning, and is that why it's appealing to people?
You know, I think it does, Molly. I really think that at the end, when you're looking at it, it's bringing the ultimate outsider into Washington, and that is Donald Trump. And I think when you look at the people he's bringing in, these are individuals who are not, many of them are not from Washington. It's not going to be the way that, let's say, if Hillary Clinton would have won, where she would have brought her Washington insiders to run the administration. I think what you're going to see is a lot of these individuals who are creative in their thinking, bringing their business success, whether it be their military success, into the administration. I also think that there is the lobbying component to it as well, and that's going to be one of the trickier parts, because as we know, as I said, lobbying has been part of the Republic. The question is, how will it be managed by this administration?
I just think you're on your heels on this one, Mercedes, because you know, it's so obvious.
I've
There's
got
so many
great heels on. I don't know what you're talking about.
So many zillionaires, so many people who've been involved in Washington. As I said, the too big to fail crowd. The idea was, we're going to get these bums out of here. I don't think he's delivered.
Juan Williams, Mercedes Schatz, thank you so much. That was extremely spirited. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Merry Christmas, guys.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
That holiday spirit. Russian President Vladimir Putin holding his year-end news conference today, addressing everything from the Berlin terror attack to the recent American elections, and whether he intends to seek another 6-year term in 2016. Kitty Logan live in London with more on this. So, Kitty, have we learned anything from this news conference today of significance?
Well, Greg, this annual press conference lasted 3 hours, 53 minutes. It covered a range of topics. One of the things Mr. Putin talked about was relations with the U.S. He said he expected security and economic ties to normalize. He denied any involvement in hacking the U.S. elections, saying the Democrats had wrongly blamed others for the loss. He did say Russia had anticipated the result and praised President-elect Trump for understanding the public mood. He also directly addressed the comments Mr. Trump made yesterday about America's nuclear capabilities.
Regarding the newly elected President Trump, there is nothing new. He was saying during his campaign about the importance of strengthening the nuclear aspect of the United States, about the strengthening of military forces. There is nothing unusual.
Now, overall, the tone of this press conference is that Russia is expecting relations with the U.S. to improve under the new president. And Mr. Putin also suggested he was ready to visit the U.S. should he receive an invitation from the new administration. Greg?
All right. So this thing was 3 hours long. I was anchoring President Obama's year-end news conference, and it was about an hour and 10 minutes. So what else did Putin have to say?
There was very little else new coming out of this press conference today. Mr. Putin also condemned last Monday's truck attack in Berlin, offering his condolences there. And he mentioned, of course, the situation in Syria, saying the evacuation from Aleppo would have been impossible without Russian help. He also says he now wants to see a ceasefire across Syria. Now, Mr. Putin didn't say whether he would stand again for re-election. He said he'd make a decision about that at a later stage. Greg?
Kitty Logan live in London. Kitty, thanks very much.
All right, the U.S. and China on a possible collision course. Why a trade war with Beijing could be in the works. And there's also this.
Arms are hurting, but just take some deep breaths.
I can't. They hurt so bad. Can you tell them?
They're coming. They know. They're coming.
Look at that, the frightening scene on the slopes. A young skier left dangling on a chairlift. We'll show you how it ended.
And we have just confirmed that an ISIS-linked news agency has released video of that Berlin attacker, the attacker that drove the truck into the Christmas crowd, swearing allegiance to that radical group. We don't know much more about that video at this point in time, when it was shot, or how the ISIS has released the video. But again, Anis Amri Apparently, sources telling us that there was a video recorded prior to the attack. Remember, he was killed in Milan, 24 years old, after he had escaped following that attack, killed in Milan in a shootout with police officers.
Beijing firing a shot across the bow of the incoming Trump administration after the appointment of this man, Peter Navarro, a noted hawk on China trade policies, to lead a new National Trade Council in the White House. Steve Moore joins us, economic advisor to President-elect Donald Trump's Transition Committee, a distinguished visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Fox News contributor. Steve, good to see you.
Hi, Greg. By the way, I'm still terrified to see what happens to that girl dangling from the
Stay tuned to Fox News. We're going to let you know what happens. It's a little boy. But
okay.
We'll let you know what happens, pal. All right. So look, Peter Navarro, he wrote a bunch of anti-China books. One of them's called Death by China. It portrays China as a real economic villain and America's most dangerous adversary. I read about half of one of his books, and he makes the following argument. Allowing China to join the WTO, World Trade Organization, decimated Americans' economy and destroyed millions of jobs. Is he right?
Well, look, I mean, there's no question that right now one of the biggest issues for the United States going forward over the next 10, 20 years is, will we continue to be the world economic superpower, or will China? Now, I don't agree with everything Peter says. He and I are good friends and we work together, but I think his central point is important, that China is not playing by the rules, Greg. They steal our intellectual property. We estimate about $200 billion a year of intellectual property, patents, drugs, vaccines that we send over to China that they simply steal and don't pay American manufacturers for that. So I do think we have to get tough with China. I love the idea of Donald Trump at the negotiating table, driving a better deal with them. And that may mean that we're going to change the way we tax, Greg, where right now I believe and I think Peter agrees with me on this, we have the dumbest tax system in the world. We tax what we export to other countries, but we don't tax what's imported into this country. And there's a lot of talk about maybe shifting that, so we're going to tax what's imported and not tax what we produce here.
Yeah, there's no question that trade and investment with China is way out of whack. I mean, it's totally out of balance. Trump, to that end, vowed that on his very first day in office, he would declare officially that China is a currency manipulator, and then he was going to slap a tariff on Chinese imports, and a pretty stiff tariff at that. Will he keep that promise, Steve?
I think he's going to use that as a club over the head of China to get them to start changing some of the ways that they operate. For example, we've opened up, Greg, our markets to the Chinese. Obviously, we're importing so much from them. They haven't opened up their markets to us. I mentioned the fact that they're stealing and cheating. In other words, there's a good argument to be made, Greg, that China needs the United States a lot more than we need them. And we ought to use some of that leverage to make sure that there is more balance in our trading relationship with them. I believe, by the way, Greg, if Donald Trump succeeds in fixing our regulatory structure here in the United States and fixing our tax system, bringing those tax rates down, I think that's going to solve 80% of the problem. I really do. Then you're going to really put the U.S. manufacturers and other exporters on a level playing field with some of these other countries. But China is a place that really has not played by the rules. And, you know, what's the name of Donald Trump's best-selling book, Greg? The Art of the Deal. Yeah. He knows how to cut deals that are going to be in American workers' interests.
Well, here's the deal he promised, a substantial, I think it was up to 30% at one point in time, tariff on Chinese imports. Steve, something that severe, wouldn't that prompt a trade war with China that would damage the American economy and hurt consumers?
Greg, I think, that 30% tariff talk was really a threat to China. And look, this is what Trump does so well. He basically puts out something out there to say, look, unless you start cooperating, you are going to hit with this club. Are we going to have a 30% tariff against China? I don't believe so. I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think we're going to see better negotiations with China. I think we're going to level out the playing field. Right now, we're running hundreds of billions of dollars of trade deficits, as you just mentioned, Greg, with China. That can't persist. The American people won't tolerate it, and it's going to change. But again, I think, you get rid of the regulations, you get rid of the taxes, and then you don't need tariffs. Because Greg, you've known me for a long time. I'm a free trade guy. I do believe in free trade. I think Trump does, but it's got to be on a fair basis.
Okay. Steve Moore, always great to see you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Greg. Yep.
All right, rough winter weather wreaking havoc on holiday travelers. Just an absolute mess out there, especially at the Los Angeles International Airport. Why the hang-ups may be far from over.